Georgie's first marriage downtime highlights the sad truth about the Coopers and young Sheldon. In the beloved sitcom Young Sheldon, viewers are treated to the coming-of-age story of Sheldon Cooper, the precocious child genius. The show has always been a brilliant mix of humor, heart, and the exploration of family dynamics. Over the seasons, however, it has also provided us with glimpses into the often difficult realities of the Cooper family, revealing a complexity to their relationships and the burdens each character carries. The unexpected storyline of Georgie Cooper's first marriage, though briefly touched upon in later episodes, shines a spotlight on the deeper, often overlooked truths about the Coopers, specifically how their dynamics contribute to the struggles they face in life. The Coopers' dysfunctional dynamics. At the core of the Cooper family is a fundamental dysfunction that seems to have impacted each member in different ways. Georgie's ill-fated marriage, and the subsequent downtime during and after it, is a subtle but significant reflection of this dysfunction. Though Georgie's situation is initially framed as a comedic and slightly absurd subplot, it ultimately highlights some deep-seated issues in the Cooper family that go beyond mere awkwardness or adolescent mistakes. Georgie, as the eldest Cooper child, has often been portrayed as the less intellectually gifted sibling compared to Sheldon and Missy. He's the easygoing, fun-loving teen who's typically the target of Sheldon's scorn. However, Georgie's life decisions, particularly his ill-advised marriage, serve as a moment of reckoning for his character and the entire family. This marriage, or more specifically, the period of downtime following its collapse, unearths the emotional baggage and unspoken tension that has been simmering within the Cooper family for years. Georgie's desire to marry, driven by an unplanned pregnancy, is emblematic of the rushed and unprepared decisions many young people make when faced with overwhelming pressure. The show cleverly uses Georgie's marriage to depict the Cooper family's overall lack of communication, emotional intelligence, and capacity for constructive support. These themes aren't merely relegated to Georgie's storyline, but are reflected in how Sheldon, Mary, and George Sr. interact with him throughout this difficult period. Georgie and Mary's unspoken strain. The relationship between Georgie and his mother, Mary, is one of the most poignant aspects of this story arc. Mary has always been portrayed as a devout and loving mother, but she is far from perfect. Her protective nature sometimes morphs into overbearing behavior, which only intensifies during moments of family crisis. Her reactions to Georgie's first marriage reveal her deep-rooted anxieties and disappointments about his choices, and more importantly, her own inability to understand or guide him through these challenging moments. Georgie's decision to get married is largely made without much input from Mary. Her attempt to intervene and her awkward attempts at providing counsel often come across as disconnected and even disheartening. The show reveals that Mary's well-meaning but misguided advice is an echo of her own upbringing and her marriage to George Sr. The emotional and relational gaps between them become more evident during Georgie's downtime, when the collapse of the marriage leads to a deeper sense of isolation for him and frustration for Mary, who struggles to offer the right support. This dynamic underscores a recurring theme in Young Sheldon, the generational gap and emotional disconnect between the characters. Mary's attempts at comforting Georgie in his moment of failure, often in ways that reflect her own insecurities and unmet expectations, show how deeply ingrained their communication issues are. Instead of fostering an open dialogue, Mary's approach only amplifies Georgie's sense of inadequacy. In many ways, she inadvertently pushes him further away, unable to provide the guidance he needs. Sheldon and the family's emotional distance. It's also worth considering how Sheldon's inability to understand or empathize with Georgie during this time further complicates the family's already strained relationships. Sheldon, who is the show's central character, has always been portrayed as the brilliant, albeit socially inept, member of the family. His intellectual superiority often places him at odds with his more emotionally driven family members. In Georgie's situation, Sheldon's lack of emotional intelligence comes to the forefront. Sheldon's utter lack of understanding of Georgie's emotional turmoil, paired with his obliviousness to the dynamics of family life, highlights a more universal truth about the Coopers: they don't know how to talk to each other. Sheldon's sarcastic comments and lack of empathy in the face of Georgie's pain only serve to exacerbate the emotional chasm between them. Sheldon's inability to process emotions in the way his family members do becomes a significant barrier to effective communication, making it even harder for Georgie to find support. While Sheldon's behavior is often framed as comedic in nature, it's also a pointed commentary on the emotional fragility within the Cooper family. The fact that Sheldon, a child genius who can understand complex theories but struggles with basic human emotions, is incapable of offering Georgie the kind of comfort or advice that he needs, is symbolic of the emotional barriers that exist within the family. Sheldon's behavior also underscores the idea that intellectual capability doesn't equate to emotional maturity or social aptitude. George Sr. and the legacy of unspoken pain. The involvement of George Sr. in Georgie's marriage story arc is equally significant. Though George Sr. is typically depicted as a lovable and somewhat hapless father figure, his handling of Georgie's marriage and its eventual collapse reveals the complex layers of pain and disappointment that have plagued the family for years. George Sr., like Mary, struggles with how to guide his son, particularly in a situation as sensitive as an unplanned marriage. While George Sr. does attempt to provide some advice, he too comes from a place of emotional deficit. His own unresolved frustrations with his marriage to Mary, compounded by his difficulty in expressing his feelings, makes it nearly impossible for him to be the strong and supportive father figure Georgie needs. The generational dysfunction is apparent here as well. George Sr.'s lack of emotional intelligence mirrors his son's, creating an unhealthy pattern of behavior that continues to cycle through the family. The hidden truth about the Coopers. Through Georgie's failed marriage, young Sheldon reveals an uncomfortable truth about the Coopers: they are a family that is deeply disconnected emotionally. While they love each other, their inability to communicate openly, to support each other effectively, and to deal with their emotions in a healthy way underpins much of their dysfunction. The collapse of Georgie's marriage doesn't just reflect his personal failure, but rather the collective emotional shortcomings of the Cooper family. In many ways, the show uses Georgie's first marriage as a way to highlight how deeply ingrained these issues are in the family's fabric. Each family member, from Mary to George Sr. to Sheldon, plays a role in creating an environment where open communication is difficult and emotional support is sparse. The collapse of Georgie's marriage and the subsequent downtime are reminders that the Coopers, despite their love for each other, are trapped in a cycle of emotional miscommunication. This storyline, though lighthearted on the surface, exposes a darker, sadder truth about the family's emotional struggles, one that may take much more than time to heal.